Hi everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Understanding the Emotional User Experience from Screens to Streets. My name is Ashleen Prashad and I'm the event manager at Affectiva. Today I'm joined by Brendan Murray, VP of Client Services at iMotions, and Gabi Zijderveld, CMO at Affectiva. Before we begin, a couple of quick housekeeping items. If you have any questions during the event, please write them in our Q&A section located in the bottom of your screen. Also, please note that we are recording today's webinar and will make the recording available to registrants before the end of the day. And now I'll hand it off to Brendan to kick off the webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashleen, and thank everybody who is joining us today. As Ashleen mentioned, I am Dr. Brendan Murray, VP of Enablement Services at iMotions, and I'm joined by Gabi Zijderveld, CMO at Affectiva. So to start us off today, the reason that we're talking about user experience among any of the other topics is that we're really in an environment where creating products and services is more challenging and competitive than ever. As is probably familiar to many of you on the call, we know that consumers today are more informed than they've been in the past. It's very easy to get access to information about brands, products, services. Consumers are able to compare and contrast much more easily, and they have on-demand expectations. They're not looking for their product or service in a few hours, in a few days, in a few weeks. They're hoping for it now. And the availability of information and services at this point makes it easy for those on-demand expectations to be met on the consumer side, more difficult on the brand and product and service side. Consumers are also able to give and receive large-scale real-time feedback with one another and with brands and service providers, which makes that comparison even easier. Consumer sentiment shifts very rapidly as a result of the things that we've mentioned so far. There are many, many choices in the marketplace, regardless of what type of product or experience people are looking for. All of these reasons come together to, as I mentioned, make a more challenging and competitive marketplace for brands, services, those providing experience to be able to connect with consumers. Users are at the heart of all of this. Without users, we don't have products, we don't have services, we don't have anybody to give these experiences to. And so this is really why we want to take a deep dive into covering some of the ways in which folks who do user experience testing are expanding their toolbox of their methodologies to be able to create the best user experiences possible. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So user experience is certainly a very broad term. We can be referring to anything from experiences that are screen-based in web or mobile environments to the real world. So as a user experience researcher, you could be wondering, how are people navigating your website? As a app developer, you could be trying to understand why you're not retaining users the way that you were hoping for. Why are you not getting the click-through rates that you were expecting? For folks who are testing user experience for real-world products, the questions may come in the form of how intuitive or easy is it for people to utilize my product as a first-time user? As soon as they take it out of the box, is it something that they can pick up and start having a successful experience with? Or is it something that's actually a little confusing and frustrating to use at first? And then Gabi is going to be talking a little bit later in the webinar today about a really cool type of user experience testing. Can think of it under the umbrella of user experience testing, where we think about different real world environments where this becomes really important. Things like driver monitoring on roads. Things like if we think about passengers in autonomous or semi-autonomous vehicles, what is that experience like for them? So it's a very broad spectrum when we use the term user experience. Today we're going to be focusing primarily on screen-based user experience and the ways in which we're seeing adoption of new types of testing for screen-based user experience testing. And then we're going to do some forward-looking or forward-thinking into both a near and slightly further away future towards the end. And we're going to take a look at some of the cool work that Affectiva is doing with driver monitoring. So when we're thinking about user experience testing, the thing that I think is quite obvious to all of us, but a little bit difficult to navigate around, is the fact that human behavior and human decision-making is complex, and designing around it is challenging. It's really difficult to predict what users are going to do in a given environment, and therefore it's really challenging to be able to create an experience that's easy and enjoyable and intuitive for them. Traditionally, user experience testing, like many forms of research testing, have revolved around trying to understand the thoughts or feelings or beliefs that people can verbalize. So things like interviews, things like surveys, even observed behaviors, things that people can tell us are really, really powerful in terms of understanding what their user experience is like. People can give us really good and candid feedback about how much they enjoy something, if they're being frustrated. But that's not the only driver of individual behavior, and it's not the only thing that dictates the type of experience that people are having. As many of you on the webinar, given that you've signed in today, are probably aware, there's also a lot of things that people can't or aren't willing to tell us about their experiences. We can think of these as kind of their unspoken thoughts or feelings or beliefs or plans. It may be that people just aren't interested in sharing their thoughts with us because they don't want to appear confrontational, because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings, because they might think that their idea or their feedback is just unique to them and not valuable. People can also have thoughts, feelings, and beliefs that they're just simply unaware of, but that still drive their behavior. And a lot of those elements are things that may not necessarily come through when we're just getting people's verbalized thoughts from them. And then, of course, everybody has biases, and many, many times we're completely unaware of what our biases are. If you have a product that's not necessarily succeeding in the market, it can be giving people a great user experience, but potentially the color scheme that you've picked to market your product is priming people in some sort of negative way, to use an extreme example. The idea here, though, is that because human behavior is complex, it requires or at least is facilitated by having a broad toolbox to be able to test and understand user experience. And that's what we want to spend the bulk of today's webinar discussing. So in terms of the tools for understanding user experience, we're probably all familiar with many of the traditional methods, which have been around for decades, if not centuries, for understanding how people go through an experience, and they exist for a reason. That's because we can get a lot of really good information from sitting people down and having a one-on-one interview with them. UX interview as people are going through an experience, as they're navigating a website, as they're using a product, having them talk through what it is that they like or dislike, what their pain points are, is really, really valuable. Observed behavior is another very commonly used tool in the toolbox for user experience researchers. Taking 2 or 3 versions of a website or an app, for example, pushing them out to people in a randomized fashion, and then just watching what's the click-through rate in different versions of the website. What's the conversion rate? What's the basket size? And making a decision in terms of a user interface based on some of those data. And then, of course, there's the controlled environment testing, where you can bring people into a laboratory, test different designs of a website, different designs of an app, different package designs, or different ways that people can interact with the product, and test those in a more quantitative fashion. We're probably all familiar with all of these types of testing. But given some of the elements that I've mentioned previously in terms of trying to understand the complexity that is user behavior and user experience, what we want to talk about is the growing adoption that we're seeing in terms of neuroscience or biosensor research in evaluating user experience. And here we're talking about things like measuring facial expressivity. How much are people smiling or frowning or furrowing their brow or making an angry face as they go through a particular experience. Something like galvanic skin response to understand physiologically what's the strength of the emotional response that individuals are having during an experience. And of course, eye tracking can be a really critical piece of user experience research. What are people noticing? What's going missed, et cetera?
And actually, Brandon, just to chime in here, when we were preparing for this webinar, we were discussing that obviously there's many other biosensory or neuroscience methodologies that one could use, but these are the 3 that are really most insightful in user experience research, right?
Absolutely. Things like electroencephalography, things like implicit association testing. There are many potential tools in the neuroscience toolbox for evaluating experiences. We're focusing on these 3 today because these are the 3 where we see both the most rapid adoption among user experience researchers and also the highest degree of scalability, both in terms of ability to conduct a lot of research and also to be able to execute it quickly and effectively.
And cost effectively, of course, as well, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, great. Thanks, Brandon, for that introduction. Just a quick sidebar. We'll talk briefly about what Affectiva does, a little bit about our technology, and then also segue briefly into what iMotions does, and then we'll give you some examples of how our combined technologies are being used. So just for some background on Affectiva, we're based in Boston. iMotions has a sizable presence here in the Boston area as well. We spun out of MIT about 10 years ago. We created a new technology category of emotion AI and kind of seeded the market, invented that space, and now broadening it to detect more than just emotions. Essentially, we've developed software, AI-based software, that can detect human expressions, human emotions, and complex cognitive states, things such as drowsiness and distraction, by analyzing both face and voice. Our technology is purely software-based, so that we don't use any hardware sensors. We use deep learning approaches, and we can deliver our technology in the cloud or on embedded systems running on the edge. We have massive amounts of data that fuel these algorithms. I'll talk a little bit more about that briefly. But one thing that's important to point out is that this is no longer a science project, and research being done in a lab. We've actually been in market with commercial products for a good 9 years now. We first got started in media analytics, and we'll talk a little bit about that use case, and now actively expanding into other areas such as automotive, and Brandon touched on that briefly. So actually, why does Affectiva exist? Why do we do that, what we do? Our vision at large is to humanize technology. We imagine a world where technology interacts with humans the way we interact with each other. And then when you think about it, today we're surrounded by all these hyper-connected devices, advanced AI systems with great cognitive capabilities or great IQ. But at the end of the day, for technology to be effective, persuasive, and intuitive, it also needs to understand the people that it's designed to interact with. Again, the emotions, the cognitive states, behaviors, activities, interactions, and even the objects that people use. Only then are we interacting with technology that truly understands us, and technology that also has emotional intelligence, or EQ, in addition to advanced IQ. The way that we do that at a very high level is that our algorithms analyze face and voice. When we analyze the face, we use any optical sensor, like a device camera or a camera that might be placed in a vehicle. Our algorithms detect the face in an image, a video image, and by analyzing at pixel gradation level, we can identify facial expressions and map facial expressions to emotions. We do that in real time. We also have a solution where in market research, we can do in-depth analysis by doing video assessments after the fact. When we do voice analytics, we are not necessarily looking at the meaning of the spoken word, but we're looking at the acoustic prosodic features. So basically, what are people saying? How are people saying things? Their volume, their tone, their speed. And that gives you a good deal of insight on people's states and the emotions that they're experiencing in the moment. Emotion AI, building emotion AI, is actually a challenging problem. First and foremost, people express emotions and other cognitive states through multiple modalities. For example, face and voice. There's also things such as gesture and body posture. And the more modalities you look at, the more accuracy or the more confidence you can get in what's actually going on with a human being. So in an ideal situation, you assess these states multimodally. Also, human states are not at all prototypical. In the real world, you rarely see an exaggerated smile, someone with big eyes open and expressive mouth. In reality, human states are very subtle and nuanced. And not only that, they evolve temporally, meaning they elapse over time. When you think of something like drowsiness, for example, when you're looking at drivers, rarely does someone go from an awake to a completely asleep state. It's something that evolves over time, and it's important to understand how that happens. Not only that, in the real world, in the wild, conditions can be challenging. There's different types of camera placement, there's lighting conditions, there's what we call occlusions, so part of people's faces might be obscured. either by something that they're wearing or something that's blocking their view. Again, think of a steering wheel in a car. And then these days, these technologies need to run in real time on embedded systems and mobile devices. And to actually compress deep learning models to do that is technologically quite a challenging feat. So we, as an organization, spend quite a bit of time continuously compressing our models so they can run on these embedded systems. And then, as we all know, data is king in machine learning. We need to collect and also annotate or label massive amounts of data, real-world data, so data collected not just in lab or not just synthetic data, but also data collected in real-world scenarios to then train and validate our classifiers, or if you will, machine learning algorithms. So all in all, it's a technologically challenging feat, an interesting one, and things that we at Affectiva are very, very much focused on. Just a brief call out on the data. We have collected massive amounts of data. It's actually at this point, this week, it's about 8.4 million faces that we've analyzed in 87 countries. So close to 5 billion frames of data that we've analyzed. And that's actually really important. We've all heard of data and algorithmic bias, where technologies such as, for example, facial recognition systems do not accurately identify certain people. And by capturing large amounts of data around the world, you can ensure that this data set is representative of different ages, gender, ethnicity, and also it's data that's captured in real-world conditions, so it's representative also of how technology eventually will be used. Since our entry into the automotive market several years ago, we've also focused, in addition to that large database, we've also focused on collecting automotive-specific data, which in itself offers a whole set of interesting challenges. Just think about how you could collect data on people who are driving drowsy. It's not like you can keep them up in a lab and then send them down the road. That's not an ethical approach, nor one that we would ever advocate. But there are ways in your strategies that you can make sure to collect a lot of data so you naturally find those examples. Or you can do studies targeting people who might be tired when they're being recorded, such as, for example, shift workers who are driving home after a long night of work. So data, again, is a very important and interesting aspect of what we do. For the past several years, we've partnered with iMotions. Our technology is integrated into their biometric platform. And through iMotions, there's many interesting research studies and clients of theirs that we've supported. We'll do a quick segue into iMotions and the platform they offer. So, Brandon, I'm going to hand it back over to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Gabby. And the driver monitoring work that you folks are working on is super exciting. And I think folks who are listening in on the call are going to be really intrigued by some of the stuff that Gabby's going to talk about towards the end of the webinar. So Gabby mentioned the need for a multimodal approach to research while introducing Affectiva, and that's really the core of what iMotions does. So iMotions, we are a software company. We provide a software platform that allows users, both academic and commercial, to be able to execute high-quality multimodal biosensor research. So Affectiva has been a wonderful partner of ours for a number of years with their FX facial expression analysis algorithm. We partner with essentially all the leading OEMs in terms of hardware sensors. So for things like galvanic skin response, electroencephalography, eye tracking, et cetera. And we provide a software platform where individuals can conduct high quality neuroscience or biosensor research without the need to use different pieces of software that go with each different piece of hardware that they're interested in doing research with. That can create a real nightmare in terms of being able to time synchronize data. To be able to present a stimulus and have all of your sensors time synchronized with the presentation of that stimulus, being able to analyze and clean those data in separate pieces of software. What iMotion software does is all of those companies that we partner with, we integrate their software through our platform so that everything can be done in one place. The time synchronization is done within iMotions, stimulus presentation, data analysis, and being able to visualize some of your data as well, which As I like to say sometimes, neuroscience or biosensor research is complicated, but it doesn't need to be difficult. And that's really the idea that I like to adhere to when I'm speaking with my clients. So as I mentioned, the idea is really to be able to take essentially any modality or combination of modalities that you're interested in doing research with, be able to run them through a single platform, and to be able to get actionable outputs out on the other side without the need for clunky research setup, both in terms of hardware and physical space that you would need. So I want to move on a bit. We've kind of set up our definitions here in terms of what we're talking about when we say user experience, and why the need to expand the user experience research toolbox exists. And now that you have a better sense of who Affectiva and iMotions are, if you weren't familiar to begin with, let's think a little bit about how we recommend and how we see individuals using this type of holistic research program in the real world. So one of the reasons why we want to think about bringing as much to bear in terms of user experience research as possible is not only for the reasons that I mentioned earlier about human behavior being complex and difficult to design around, which it is, but we also want to be able to really granularly understand in the moment what is the type of experience that a user or a consumer is having. And this is one of the big benefits of considering technologies like facial expression analysis, galvanic skin response, eye tracking, where with facial expression analysis, for example, in the moment while a user is going through an experience, you can be using a webcam to capture and understand how frequently are people smiling. Are people furrowing their brow, which may be an indication of something like confusion or frustration when we pair it with some of the other measures that we've discussed. In the moment when people are having an experience, what is the degree of emotional responsiveness that they're having? How strongly are they reacting to something? And we can measure that easily and reliably through a wrist-based device to measure galvanic skin response. And then, of course, one of the things that every user experience researcher wants to understand, which is, are people actually noticing the things that I want them to notice, either in my interface or on my product, or in whatever environment that I'm testing? Eye tracking is a really, really critical piece of this as well. And that can really help to tie everything together in terms of when people are having a response, what is it that they're responding to? What were they looking at? Or what were they looking at a few seconds previous? When after the fact, people tell you that they found part of the experience frustrating, what were they looking at when they were experiencing that kind of frustration? And so the idea here is really to be able to measure people both in the moment, understanding the experience as it's happening for them, and then also after the fact, what do they remember? What do they think they're going to do in the future, or what are they planning to do? You can imagine how these things flow together, right? Where the first question is, as UX researchers, we want to understand is, did people notice the things that I wanted them to notice? Or what's going missed? Is there real estate that I'm utilizing within my interface, on my package design, within my vehicle that really everybody is ignoring, and I could reallocate that real estate to something else that might improve the experience further? When people notice something, are they expressing emotions on their face? Are they smiling? Are they furrowing their brow? And if they're having those emotional reactions, to what degree? How strongly are they responding to whatever it is that they're encountering? Is it a small fleeting moment of delight or frustration, or is it something that's more persistent, which may be something that we can design around either in a way to accentuate those things that people are having a strong and positive response to, or design around those things that they may be having a more aversive reaction to. And then finally, wrapping it all together with all the traditional tools that we're familiar with. After the fact, or even a few seconds after people do something, what were they thinking, or what did they believe they were feeling at the time? What do they remember about the experience? What are their key takeaways from that experience that they had, which is a great indicator of potential future advocacy of what they're going to talk to friends and family about. And before we jump in a little bit in terms of how we see these tools being utilized, one thing to keep in mind that for all of those who are user experience researchers, we know that user experience doesn't just occur in a vacuum. That understanding the experience that users are having is often part of a broader understanding of consumers and users in general. You can have the best product in the world and it can offer people a great experience, but if it's marketed poorly or marketed incorrectly, if the rollout process is not efficient, if it doesn't have enough about it that's memorable, that people are going to be loyal and they're going to advocate and it's going to drive them to future action, then you might be wasting an awful lot of potential with your product or your service. And all of these different components of the user experience from end to end, whether that's the product itself, whether it's the marketing around it, whether it's the client service, all of those are places where this type of holistic approach to research, which incorporates both neuroscience or biosensor measures, as well as some of those traditional measures that we're all familiar with, can really help improve all of the facets of that process. So let's talk a little bit about measuring emotion, and specifically in a screen-based user experience context. So first, why do we care about emotion? The answer to that is probably obvious. You're probably already thinking of some reasons yourselves. But the basic answer is that emotions drive the way that people are going to act. We know from decades of both psychology and neuroscience literature that the experiences that are the most memorable for people and are the ones that have the most influence over future action are those experiences or those moments that elicit some sort of emotional response from individuals. And emotion or emotional response can be a pretty broad and nebulous term. So I want to just take a second to really operationalize what we're talking about when we think about emotion. So an emotion or an emotional response is really a physiological reaction to something where your brain is identifying something as relevant for future action in the environment. Emotional responses can be positive or negative. They can be strong or weak. One of the prevailing theories of emotion that comes from academic research on emotion, which is what I did my PhD in, is in thinking about the emotional experience that humans have as a two-dimensional construct. What we mean by that is that an emotional experience that we have, we're super happy and elated by something, or we're really, really frustrated by something, or we're bored out of our minds. That's actually a combination of two different dimensions. The first dimension, which is visualized over on the right side of the screen here on the vertical axis, is called emotional arousal, or activation or deactivation. You can think of this as just how strong is the response that somebody is having. And this is a dimension that I mentioned that we can measure reliably with something like galvanic skin response. That activation or deactivation can be either positive or negative. By itself, it does not tell us if somebody is really, really excited and loving something, or if they are absolutely hating it and can't wait to get away from it. To be able to add that layer of positive, negative, or pleasant versus unpleasant, we need to bring in some other measures, something like facial expression analysis through something like Affectiva's AFDEX algorithm, to be able to understand, are people smiling? Are they frowning? Is this a positive or a negative experience for them? Many self-reported methodologies, interviews, survey questions after the fact can also help to get at, was this a positive or negative experience for people? What you can do once you have those two dimensions of emotional experience measured, activation and deactivation, and pleasant versus unpleasant, is then you can take various experiences, parts of experiences, pages within a website, and you can parse them into this two-dimensional space. Imagine that you are designing a mobile banking app, and you have a couple of different interfaces for your mobile banking app, and you're not sure which to move forward with. So you bring people into a laboratory, they can go through an experience with one of those interfaces that you've designed, and you give people specific tasks to do. Things like checking their balance, ordering a new checkbook, applying for a loan. And you have them do that across all of these interfaces while you're taking some of these in-the-moment measures, like measuring their facial expressions, measuring their galvanic skin response. You can then plot all of those tasks or those parts of the experience across the different interfaces in something like this two-dimensional visualization, and that can very quickly and easily help you identify, okay, what seems like the design layout that's working the best, that's kind of getting people excited or at the least giving them a positive experience? Or are there specific tasks that, regardless of the interface, seem to be really frustrating for people? They're activating, but in a negative way, and then using that to inform your future design. And the idea here is that these types of methods really don't require doing much different from the type of user experience research that you're used to doing. These neuroscience or biosensor measures can layer in very easily with existing methodologies. One sort of approach that we are seeing very rapid adoption among user experience researchers is what you might call biometrically augmented user interviews. You can imagine a scenario where you bring respondents into your laboratory to do a user experience interview. They're going to go through whatever your platform or product experience is. There's a moderator who's asking them questions. Except in addition to the questions, you're also going to have a webcam on them to be able to measure their facial expressivity, and you're going to have a GSR sensor on them so that you can measure that degree of emotional activation or deactivation. Your moderator can then be actually watching live the respondents' responses in something like iMotions software interface and use that real-time information about how people are responding to decide, oh, it looks like this person was having a response when they were going through this particular part of my web page. I'm actually going to stop and probe them on that to ask them questions about why they may have been responding the way that they were. Or it looks like people are really getting hung up on this one icon that's in the corner of my screen. I'm seeing that this person is looking right at that icon. I'm going to stop and ask them what it is that they feel like drew their attention to it. If you don't like interrupting people during a user experience interview, you can also do this after the fact. A moderator can still be watching those live signals and taking notes about things that they want to probe the user on after they're done with the experience, or they can actually even sit and replay the experience for that user and say, hey, you know, it looks like you were responding X, Y, and Z way at this point. Talk me through what you were thinking and feeling at that point in time. We're seeing very rapid adoption of this type of user experience testing because it's very easy to layer into existing methodologies and can really augment the information that can be received from users in that environment. And then, of course, you can think about sort of traditional controlled lab-based testing as well. I gave an example of this previously with a mobile banking advertisement, but this would be a more quantitative approach where you're bringing a sample or samples of respondents into a lab, exposing them to one or more interfaces, giving them some kind of controlled tasks to do, and then coming up with some summary measures of things like emotional activation, facial expressivity, visual attention after the fact to compare design A to design B to design Z if that's what you're looking for. What's really critical in terms of this testing, and which at iMotions we talk about very frequently with our clients and customers, is considering standardization in terms of testing. Being able to execute the same type of study design over and over again as sort of a research best practice. This is a great thing to do regardless of the type of research that you're doing. But when we start thinking about introducing some of these neuroscience methodologies, like galvanic skin response or facial expressions, standardization can really help you execute your research in a very efficient fashion, both because if you're utilizing the same type of design repeatedly, your analysis becomes much easier if you can repeat your analytical steps after you complete a study. It also allows you to do something like go back and compare the results of this year's user interface test to the test that you executed 2 years ago to understand, are the changes that you're considering implementing in your design, are those really incremental and they're moving the needle a little bit? Or is this actually a really broad sweeping change for people as compared to past tests that you've done before? So I'm going to just quickly talk through a couple of case studies, and then I'm going to turn it over to Gabby as well. So the first case study where we want to give an example of where this has been done in practice comes from actually the Danish Competition and Consumer Authority. So the Danish Competition and Consumer Authority were interested in testing a hypothesis that they had, which was that during an e-commerce experience, one of the things that leads to substantial frustration or difficulty for online shoppers is the terms and conditions that come with products that they're purchasing. Terms and conditions we're all familiar with can be gigantic blocks of text that we really don't want to read through, and that can lead to confusion in terms of what are the policies for a product in terms of when it can be returned. What are the terms around the shipping, for example. And the DCCA wanted to try out, well, what if we took that block of text for terms and conditions and we actually replaced it with iconography to communicate what those terms are? Would that actually positively impact the user experience for consumers? And so what they did was they executed an A/B test utilizing facial expressivity, eye tracking, and then observed behavior in an e-commerce environment. In one case where users would see sort of standard traditional terms and conditions, and one where users would see terms and conditions made with iconography. And what they found was that the iconography-based terms and conditions were actually noticed much faster by consumers in this e-commerce environment. They were looked at for longer and actually resulted in a reduction in facial expressions of brow furrowing, which in conjunction with much of the self-report that they received from consumers after the fact, indicated that people were less confused by what the terms and conditions were. So this relatively small change to layout has actually had a big impact. The DCCA is currently working on revised regulations for how e-commerce sites display their terms and conditions to online shoppers. And the Canadian Radio and Television Commission has actually, they saw the results of this study presented at a conference by the DCCA, and they've actually already begun updating their own regulations in terms of how terms and conditions are displayed on a website. So kind of immediate actionable feedback from implementing some of these tools. And the last example that I wanted to mention before I turn it over to Gabi is a little bit further afield from traditional screen-based UX research, but we want to get people thinking creatively about how these tools can be used before we move into some of the really exciting applications. So this was a study that was done by a technology company several years ago who were coming out with a new technology product that they were very excited about. They were looking for an awful lot of user adoption for it, but they were concerned that it was going to be confusing for consumers because this was going to be a very customizable piece of technology that consumers could purchase and they could tailor it specifically to their needs. Very high hopes for how this was going to be received by the public, but there was concern about there are going to be a lot of choices in terms of designing these customizations. Are people going to get confused by how much choice they had? And so this company wanted to be able to utilize some of the tools that we've talked about so far to be able to test and understand what if we had an interface where if the interface could sense that people were getting frustrated or confused during the design process, that interface could actually update or adapt to the user's responses in real time, to do something like curate the number of choices that are on the screen or to offer people a help video. The technology product itself was not ready at the time that they wanted to do this testing. And so what they did was they created an analog through a website where people could go on and design their own beverage with hundreds of potential options for creating flavor combinations for this particular beverage. There was a lot of choice. It was a relatively bare interface with little instruction and a lot of different customizations that consumers could make. And what they wanted to understand was if we measure people's facial expressions, galvanic skin response, and eye tracking in real time, can we create a smart interface that can update if it senses that people might be getting confused or frustrated with the process? So within this mock web environment, respondents who came into the lab, of course, they were given an incentive and paid for their time, and they were told, hey, some of that payment that you're going to be receiving for participating today, you can actually put that towards purchasing the beverage that you design if you choose, and you can also buy some add-ons to go along with it. Consumers were measured in real time, their facial expressions, galvanic skin response for emotional activation, visual attention from eye tracking, and then their basket size was measured. The consumers were split into two groups, so half of them were randomly assigned to just the straight interface where they would design their beverage from hundreds of potential choices, and they would go through and be able to basket their purchase. The other half of consumers were put in front of the same interface, but that interface would actually adapt in real time based on things like combinations of galvanic skin response and facial expressions. So if it sensed that people were getting frustrated, the huge number of choices available might get curated down, or they might be offered a coupon towards their purchase, or an explainer video for flavor combinations. And what they wanted to understand was, did that actually have a measurable change in basket size when the interface was smart and adapted to consumers' physiology in real time? And the answer was yes, there's actually a significant increase for those who received those adaptations in terms of what their basket size was. It was about 10% more than the folks who received no adaptations. And very interestingly, consumers were debriefed after the fact about what was going on, that there was this adaptive interface, and they were asked, is this something that's interesting to you, or would you find this creepy? And very interestingly, overwhelmingly, the overwhelming majority, almost 90% of folks said that they did not think that it was creepy or intrusive, and nearly 100% said that it would be the kind of thing that they would be interested in using if they encountered it in the real world. I'm going to turn it over to Gabi just to talk through a couple more really exciting examples, and then we'll wrap up a bit.
Yeah. And I think actually these adaptive interfaces are so interesting. A number of years ago, we did some work in gaming, for example, right? And just think about the concept of games that are really designed to take you on an emotional journey. But today, these games do not really understand the emotions of someone who's playing the game. So what if these games could and adapt the narrative in real time? Or think about brick and mortar retail scenarios with digital signage, right? So I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. And it's really great to see in your research that in this particular study, consumers are actually quite open to using these type of technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very, very cool. So just switching gears briefly to a few other use cases. Affectiva first got started really in media and advertising, where the big brands of the world, their advertisers and market researchers were really the early adopters of motion AI, and specifically analyzing people's facial expressions and reactions to content that was being served up. So imagine in this use case scenarios where the big brands of the world do studies to test, for example, advertising, videos, or even TV programming. Our technology can unobtrusively run in the background as paid participants are watching content, and we measure scientifically their unfiltered, unbiased, and spontaneous responses to this content. We measure frame by frame how people are reacting. And because this is all done in a cloud-based platform, these brands can do that at scale. You could easily do a study with a few hundred participants in a multitude of countries. So very cost-effective, very quick way for them to do this type of research. And today, about 1,400 brands and about 25% of the Fortune Global 500 use our technology to test their digital content. The insights they can get from our emotion data helps them allocate media spend. I have a small example of that in a bit. It also helps to do cut downs, shortening longer TV ads to short online ads is actually quite difficult to do. How do you retain the most engaging moments? So our technology can help with that. You can determine the effectiveness of voiceovers and taglines and where exactly to place them. You can assess if the story arc is actually achieving the emotional impact you would like it to have, and decide on things such as brand reveal. Where do you actually place the brand in a piece of digital content? So there's some really interesting things they do with our technology. An interesting example was Kellogg's did a study for a new Crunchy Nut campaign that they came out with a few years ago, and I believe it ran in Australia and in the UK. They had already decided on a number of creatives or a number of ads that they were going to run. They all centered around humorous creatures, so there was an ad around the snake, an ad around the dinosaur, an ad around an alien. All three of these ads were going to be used. They just wanted to decide which of these ads would possibly have the best impact and where should they put the bulk of their media spend or their advertising dollars behind. On the first round of testing using our technology, it turned out that the snake ad garnered the most smiles. Everyone thought it was hilarious, big reactions, great engagement. But they thought, okay, let's do some further testing, because there's also a concept which is called wear out, where upon repeat viewing, people basically get a bit tired of the content and it doesn't have the same effect anymore. So they did a second round of testing, and it was quite interesting to show what our data identified, which was that this particular ad, the snake ad, on repeat viewing was not funny at all anymore, and it was actually the alien ad that consistently, upon repeat viewing, garnered the best responses. So against kind of their intuitive reaction at first, oh, we should go with this one particular ad, they switched gears and put the bulk of their media spend against this alien ad. After the fact, Kellogg's did some sales modeling, and sales results showed that that was indeed the best performing ad. So this is an example of how in the media and advertising space, our type of facial analysis technology can be used. But I'd like to wrap with an exciting and also forward-looking use case, specifically in automotive. In automotive, our technology is used mainly for two different things. On the one hand, we're very focused on improving road safety by being able to sense or measure the driver impairment state, understand things such as drowsiness and distraction. So that's one very important use case. The other one is understanding what's going on with the other people in the vehicle. So occupants, what are their reactions to the environment? How are they interacting with the HMI? What is their overall mood? Are they comfortable? Are they stressed out? Are they enjoying themselves? And with that type of data, you can optimize and eventually also personalize the overall transportation experience. Affectiva entered the automotive space about 3 years ago. Today, we're working with all the leading car manufacturers of the world and their supplier ecosystem, companies such as Aptiv, Veoneer, Seiki, and also other technology players in the automotive space, such as, for example, Nuance Communications, with whom we're working to add another layer of intelligence into their drag and drive intelligent virtual assistant platform. I wanted to just take a quick little sidebar on the autonomous, what we'd like to call the autonomous vehicle continuum. We've all heard of autonomous vehicles or self-driving vehicles, and there's different levels of autonomy in these vehicles. Think of level 1 and 2 for where we are for the most part today. When you think about a Tesla, there's just, people would probably argue with you on it. Is it a level 2, maybe a 2.5, maybe it's not quite a level 3. And then level 5 is a scenario where you have vehicles where you don't even have a steering wheel anymore. And a few years back, the projections were quite aggressive about that. Within 10 years in our lifetime, we would see that. And I think the automotive industry is now coming back from that a little bit, where we're even hearing voices say, like, maybe this is not ever possible, or we're 20 to 40 years out. So that's not imminent, although there's a lot of research being done in that space, and we're working with a lot of companies that are doing interesting research in that area. Our technology applies across that continuum, where today there's a big focus on driver state monitoring, again, understanding driver impairment, driver distraction, driver drowsiness, which of course is very relevant the moment you still have human drivers everywhere on the road. But as that gets less over time, the emphasis shifts to the in-cabin experience. What is actually going on in that vehicle? What's happening with the people in the vehicle? How are they experiencing the transportation? What are the objects they're using? How are they interacting with the vehicle? How are they interacting with each other? These things become exceedingly more important, and these type of experiences is where our technology is getting applied today. Here's a little bit more detail. I'm not going to get into everything here right now. You see actually on the slide an example of data we've collected in the real world. This was a gentleman driving around the Boston area with, you can't quite see it, as child strapped into the back seat falling asleep, which is quite scary. But imagine if our technology could understand levels of drowsiness. When this particular person was first getting drowsy, you don't want the vehicle to have all these audio and visual alerts going off. Maybe a simple dashboard display notification to the driver could be sufficient. However, as this person is falling more asleep, there might be aggressive intervention needed. Maybe more audible alerts, more clear signage, maybe a seatbelt tug, or if the car has self-driving capabilities, maybe pulling the vehicle over to the side of the road. All car manufacturers are myopically focused on solving this problem, and they realize that taking an AI-driven approach to measure these complexities is way more important than just simply looking at eye and head movement, which was what they were focused on up till now. There's regulatory environments such as the European New Car Assessment Program or Euro NCAP that are requiring all new vehicles. If they want to get the most stellar vehicle ratings, they have to have these driver monitoring systems by 2020. But at the end of the day, we all know that too many fatalities and traffic accidents are caused by drowsy and distracted driving. And with our type of technology, we can do something about that. So that's the use case around driver state monitoring. And then occupant experience monitoring is an interesting one, right? As we see increases in rideshare and the event of robo-taxis, it also grossly transformed consumer expectations of what a transportation brand experience needs to be. And at the beginning of this webinar, Brandon touched as well around all these complexities and these challenges, the on-demand information, consumer expectations. So as mobility shifts and there's different concepts such as shared mobility, robo-taxis, robo-shuttles, it's going to be exceedingly important to understand much better what the mood is of the people in such a vehicle and how do they react to the overall environment, not only the HMI, but also the actual journey that they're taking, so that you can be way more reactive to passenger needs in the moment. At the end of the day, in those future next generation vehicles, these passengers are a captive audience, and it offers tremendous opportunities to personalize the environment based on those needs, or maybe even monetize on those situations if consumers are responsive to that. I will play this video. We're coming close to the end of it, but I think this video shows a good example of how this technology can be applied in vehicles, and then we'll quickly wrap up with questions at the end. So please get your questions ready in the chat if you have any. And can we increase the audio?
We are on a mission to humanize technology by building artificial emotional intelligence. We realized in the automotive industry that a lot of the players are focused on the outside of the vehicle, and no one was really paying attention to the inside of the vehicle. Our technology is able to identify distracted while driving based on whether your eyes and your head are on the road or off the road, indicators of drowsiness. If you're yawning, you blink rate, it can alert you and suggest that you maybe stop for some coffee, adjust the music or the temperature. We are also able to identify facial and vocal expressions of emotions such as joy, anger, laughter. When we're able to detect all of these social and cognitive cues, the car can adapt in real time to increase safety, but also improve your experience as an occupant.
So when you think about using these neuroscience methodologies and these biometric sensors, and laying it into the context of consumer experience, there's many more applications than the one that Brandon and I spoke about today, especially for our area, right, the emotion AI or human perception AI area. There are really interesting opportunities in healthcare, mental health, diagnoses and treatments, and online education, devices, gaming, robotics, video communications, even human resources. Way more than we can talk about today, maybe a great topic for another webinar where we talk about the future of human perception AI. But I wanted to just wrap for any of you who are interested in learning more. October 15th, Affectiva is organizing the annual Emotion AI Summit in Boston. One of Brandon's colleagues, Dr. Jessica Wilson, is going to do an awesome presentation, workshop, and demo on the iMotions platform there. But many of the themes we touched on today will also be explored at that event. So check out the agenda. We have over 30 amazing speakers at www.emotionaisummit.com, and you can register there as well if you're interested. So with that being said, we had some questions coming in. So, Brandon, you want to just grab one of these first questions here?
Sure, absolutely. So one of the questions that we had was related to is sweat analysis on the radar. I'll give a quick answer to this one. Didn't go into too much detail in the interest of time, but when we think about sweat analysis, you may be thinking of galvanic skin response, which is measurement of changes in skin sweat when an individual is having some sort of emotional reaction to something. So that is already something that is being measured and utilized frequently in user experience research. Apologies if that didn't quite answer the question, but I believe that may have been what we were referring to there.
Yeah. Okay. I'll grab another question here, which is, as you've seen, any variations in the data that we've collected across age groups, gender, countries. We're curious if your database has yielded any cultural differences or variances between genders. So it's a good question, and the answer is absolutely yes. There's a lot of detail there, and we could spend a lot of time, but just to give you a few examples, we've all, for example, heard of the polite smile that you tend to see in countries such as, for example, Japan. And it was really interesting to see a number of years back when we were analyzing our data that our data set actually totally corroborates that. More importantly, we're seeing that in collectivist cultures, such as, for example, Japan or Southeast Asia, when people are in group settings, they are way less expressive. However, when they're, for example, doing a study by themselves in the privacy of their home, sitting behind a webcam, they're actually extremely expressive, whereas in individualistic cultures, like in the US, it's actually the inverse, where people are in group settings, they're very expressive, maybe because they have to assert their individuality and jump out from the pack and all that good stuff, but less expressive when they're in the privacy of their home doing a study and sitting in front of that webcam. We also see gender differences, we see age differences. So absolutely the answer is yes. Let's see if we have another question here.
Sure, I think we've got time for one or two more. I'll grab one here. We had a question around for running a typical UX design study, what are we looking at in terms of time to gather the data using some of these biosensor methodologies, and what do we usually see in terms of number of respondents for those studies? Short answer is it certainly depends on the type of research. In terms of number of respondents, if you want to do something like those live UX interviews that I mentioned before, those can be done qualitatively, really with any number of respondents that you would do traditional UX research. In terms of turnaround time on the data, that approach is really immediate. You're using the real-time responses to be able to inform the interview that you're doing. You can do additional analysis on the back end if you'd like, but otherwise you're getting the results right then. And then for something like a more controlled laboratory study, in terms of data collection, aside from putting sensors on folks and calibrating them, doesn't take any longer to collect the data than a standard UX study would. In terms of sample size, we typically recommend 30 respondents per cell that's being tested as a good sample size to be able to get reliable results.
All right, cool. And just having a quick look and see if there's a quick question that we can answer here. I'm going to just quickly scroll through this. There's a few questions that were worded differently, but basically came down to the same thing. Yeah, here's a question: if we're actively working with any automakers today, curious when we can expect to see these features roll out into our vehicles. Do you know of any roles that regulations play into this as well? Yeah, so we are actively working with the auto manufacturers today. As you can imagine, building a car and the technology in it is a multi-year roadmap. So just for clarity's sake, we are not yet deployed in vehicles that are on the road today, but we're working on contracts that will get us into vehicles in the next 2 to 3 years. However, there is also kind of a segment, if you will, in automotive, which is the fleet management companies. So those are those companies that build these platforms that monitor drivers such as, for example, truck drivers or bus drivers, where there's a whole range of other regulatory and insurance liability issues that require them to measure what's going on with the fleet. And those solutions are already deployed in vehicles, and it's a much faster time to market for us to integrate into those. So that will hopefully happen within the next year or so. And I briefly touched on the Euro NCAP regulations, but definitely out of Europe, we're seeing more regulation coming out and expecting to see more of that in the US as well. Don't have any tabs yet on anything that's immediately pending. But as more AI is being deployed into vehicles, as there's more focus on improving road safety by monitoring drivers, I think we're going to see a lot more regulation coming out also in the US. So on that note, we're right at the top of the hour. I think we're going to have to, now I know we're going to have this webinar recorded, and everyone who had registered and who has attended will get a link to the recording. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Thank you for your interest, and especially thank you, Brandon, for working with us on this webinar.
Absolutely, and thank you, Affectiva, for setting all of this up, and hope that everybody found the material interesting.
Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.